Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Barsana. I'm Assistant Curator and Manager of Publications here at the Museum of Contemporary at Los Angeles. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon to our panel, Art Education in the Age of COVID-19. I am joined by my co-presenter and colleague, Jean Hoyle, who will co-moderate this with me. And it's my pleasure to introduce her to the virtual MoCA programs world. So welcome. I'm so happy we can work together. I just wanted to give some program notes today. So we're going to be joined by 4 panelists, and it will be a series of questions that we'll read to them. And we're hoping to get also Q&A, so we'll have time for that at the end of the program. If you do have those, please either drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll hope to get to them, if they're good questions, towards the end of the program. Some other things just to keep you posted on things happening at Virtual MoCA. Tomorrow we will be discussing our most recent screen program for a lunchtime sort of art talk around a program called Future Continuous that we did with the art space Joan and Land. And then next week we'll be premiering a new work by Vishal Jujeo on our screen program called wow, now I'm blanking, but where have there been lions? And we'll be followed that Friday by another program where we discuss the role of queerness and transgender identity in India, in contemporary India. With that having been said, I'm going to pass it off to my co-presenter Jean, who's going to read a little bit of an intro, and then I will read the bios of each of our wonderful participants.
Thank you. So, art educators now face unique, unavoidable challenges when attempting to provide students with equitable, accessible lessons that approximate the in-class experience. The often hands-on nature of art education has proven to be an especially difficult discipline to translate to online instruction. An heroic effort has been undertaken by these educators over the course of the year as they adapted their methods to a constantly changing landscape. From elementary, middle, and high school teachers to professors of BFA and MFA students and college art history instructors, art educators have experienced a year that has tested their resolve.
So I'm just going to introduce all 4 of them, and just to say that we're so thankful to have them and to celebrate and highlight the work that they've been doing. I think that this is really the point of this panel. So as I go into a long bio role, I want to just say that ahead. So Suzanne Hudson is the Associate Professor of Art History at the University of Southern California. Suzanne is an art historian, critic, and associate, I already said that, but she writes on modern and contemporary art with an emphasis on histories of abstraction, painting, and process. A regular contributor to Artforum, Hudson has contributed numerous essays to international exhibition catalogs and artist monographs. John Ildefonso is at the Department of Art and Department Chair at Camino Nuevo del Cel Lance High School. He's a recent graduate from California State University, Los Angeles with an MFA in painting. He regularly exhibits in the greater Los Angeles area. Currently, he teaches full-time as the Art Department Chair at Camino Nuevo del Cel Lance High School. John is a former MoCA educator, yay alum, and was a MoCA teen apprentice back when he was in high school. Rebecca Morris is a professor of painting and drawing at University of California, Los Angeles. She is a Los Angeles-based abstract painter whose work deeply investigates materials, form, processes, and outcomes, often at an ambitious scale. Born in Honolulu, Hawaii, Morris received her BA from Smith College, MFA from the School of Art Institute of Chicago, and attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. Morris's work is in the permanent collections of the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, Hammer Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, among many, many, many others. And last but not least, Carolina Rosas is a teacher at Walnut Park Elementary. Carolina Rosas is currently a 4th grade teacher working for Los Angeles Unified School District at a school located in the heart of Huntington Park. Carolina is also an active participant in Contemporary Art Start, MoCA's year-long classroom partnership program. Welcome to you all, and thank you for being here.
So I'll start us off, and please feel free to answer in any order. Thinking back just to take us back for a minute, how did the transition from in-person to virtual classes unfold at the onset of the pandemic for you? And I'll open that to anyone. John, can I put you on the spot?
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, thank you for having me today. I appreciate that a lot. The transition was difficult. I mean, the primary concern was how to meet the needs of students, how to meet the need of teachers who aren't tech savvy. Teachers now had to work from home. If they were lucky, they could use a spare bedroom, maybe a dining room table, maybe their 5-year-old in the background, right, yelling. It was tough, and it's still challenging. In students' case, most students are pretty tech savvy, but for some reason, students have a difficult time logging into class as students had to get used to the new pandemic school schedule. Classes are spread throughout the week. Schedule is very different compared to what we had earlier or what they were used to. But luckily, the school has been using online platforms since the inception, like Google Classroom, Parent Square, Power School, Gradebook. But now we're heavily reliant on those tools. And the high school has always had a one laptop per student initiative. So we're able to have each student pick up a laptop, take it home with a Wi-Fi hotspot.
I'm going to ditto what John just said. And again, thank you also for inviting me. This is a privilege and thank you. But yeah, it was a pivotal moment, and where you're on a regular schedule from Monday through Friday, and then you show up to work and they tell you, okay, grab everything you need and make sure that the student has all their supplies, and this is it, this is for the rest of the year. So you're thinking, what do I give my students who I've been with since day one, and I have to now release them? I won't be seeing them. I'll see them, but they'll be on virtually, and they won't have the same tools that they have while they're in here in the classroom. So the whole idea of having to transition from a face-to-face to a virtual was first very, very tough on our students, because they were still my 4th grade students, although they were, as John put it, some of them are very tech savvy. It's a different adjustment than when you are in the class, because you can't just turn around and ask somebody for something, or you can't get up out of your seat to get something else, or the teacher's not right in front of you to just grab her and say, hey, I need help with this. Can you come help me? It's all done virtually. So it was definitely an adjustment and a learning curve for parents, teachers, students, and everybody involved with us. So it took a toll. It's taken a toll, and it's still taking the toll.
I would agree with all of that. And also thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be in conversation with you all. We also transitioned quite abruptly and quickly, as did everybody. But the factor that we had, which hasn't come up yet because we're teaching at a university, is that students dispersed, everywhere. And so we were all of a sudden not only dealing with online learning, but also online learning across many continents and time zones, figuring out what we could do, this whole new lexicon of synchronous and asynchronous, thinking about how to have kind of the intimacy of conversation at a distance was, I think, one of the most profound challenges. But also because I teach art history instead of art making or studio practice or a bench science or something like that. I mean, I mostly deal with books and ideas and thinking about history through these artifacts. So a lot of the content could migrate, but it made me think much more about the people who I was actually interacting with and their life circumstances and where they were. And I think that was actually really the most significant adjustment, which is one that should happen, and that I'm sure we'll talk about what will outlive this moment. But I think for a lot of us in higher ed, that's something incredibly important to grapple with, is not just the content or the delivery mechanism, but actually what is the use value of this information to the people who are receiving it? How can dialogue be sustained across many different formats? And these kinds of issues, I think, were really foremost for me in those first weeks.
Yeah, I mean, this was literally a year ago because right now at UCLA, we're between our winter and spring quarters. And I remember being at a faculty meeting at the end of the winter quarter and being told that we were going to go to remote teaching probably for the first 2 weeks of the spring quarter. And, you know, even hearing that, I remember thinking that's insanity. How could you teach a studio class over a computer? Like, I remember just being in shock and thinking, this is not possible. I refuse to do this. This is ridiculous. And here we are a year later, and I'm doing it and have just finished teaching a beginning painting class on top of it. So, I mean, it was really wild. I'd say that some of the benefits for when it happened, at least for the UCLA quarter system, was that I had, and we all had this kind of timeout, you know, this break time to readjust and do it, so it wasn't happening in the middle of a class. But talking to colleagues who were teaching that had to go to remote during the semester, they had the benefit of already having a class community in place, whereas I remember having to create a virtual community in the classroom with people who hadn't met in person before necessarily, and I didn't know them in person. So it was a really different context to create that in the moment, as opposed to using the classroom, you know, community and dovetailing that into remote. So it was really different. I appreciated the way that we were all learning together. That was helpful. And just, you know, always feeling like the students are so ahead of everything that I could know or do technology wise. I felt like it was a level playing field in that sense. So that was helpful. But yeah, it was a huge amount of work. It was a paradigm shift, and all the challenges that people have mentioned, they're real and ongoing.
To that point, you know, I would ask, well, what are some of the opportunities that you discovered that were available to you, that you were able to take advantage of because of online teaching, and whether you think that those will endure beyond the need to online teach, let's put it that way, because I think online teaching is here to stay.
Well, I think one thing, I mean, kind of, I guess it's the other side of this idea of dispersal. I mean, we've been really taking advantage of the fact that we can invite people from all over to come to class. And that has, I think, broadened many conversations, especially when we're thinking about trying to get a multiplicity of perspectives relative to a given topic. The pragmatics aren't always on your side of how to actually achieve that. And with Zoom, it's so easy just to invite people to come and kind of drop in very casually. And so I think there is a sense of intimacy in that when they're not recording. And that's maybe a whole other issue, which is the very dark side of kind of questions of how the liveness of the classroom lives on in ways that people might not want or might self-censor, knowing that things are being recorded. But it's also, I think, been a real opportunity to kind of open the walls of the classroom, as it were.
I'm going to agree with Susan. It's definitely not your typical classroom, but it has lent itself to digital resources and access to, it could be a multitude of, and I'm going to say different opportunities. It could be whether, like you said, a visitor in our classroom, which we normally we have to jump through hoops of fire to get to happen. And with this, it's so much easier. And I will give an example of something. I happen to have a friend who happens to have a very good connection with somebody in NASA, and we had a visitor. So my students were floored at that whole opportunity. And it was pretty neat that as you said, there was ability to see something that was happening live, and it's an amazing situation, but it was a situation that never would have happened had we been in a regular classroom. But the fact that this, Diane, this, I guess you could say this way of learning, or the way it's opened doors to, I want to say, and I'm trying not to say this word simply because, and then it's going to be, I don't want to call it as a scapegoat of a situation, but it has definitely lifted a lot of red tape, simply because you have policies and things that you have to follow, which I understand are there for safety reasons, but at the same time, it has given opportunity to things that has, as Rebecca brought up, that the students are bringing in and are actually teaching some of us as teachers, saying, hey, you know what, do it this way, or look, I know this person and I can get you in contact with that person. And so that networking has not only happened with adults, but I think that for students, it's happened to the teachers. So it's opened a gateway, which has never been there. So I think it's a great opportunity, and it's basically opened doors and windows for the kids to be able to see, hey, I have this in my hand and this is pretty powerful. Mm-hmm. So it's really opened their eyes to all of the things that are there for them. I know it sounds horrible, but the click of a button and they're off. So that opportunity with the whole NASA thing, we're like, wait a minute, you know, I can do this. I'm like, yeah, you can. And, you know, making connections with people is a lot easier this way, but it doesn't replace that human connection, because a lot of them will say, could you imagine what it would have been like had we been in class? And then there's that what if. So, yeah.
I want to echo what Carolina and Suzanne talked about, the idea of like taking advantage of these opportunities, and also, Suzanne, the idea of displacement. Like within our staff at work, we've discussed, you know, how to accommodate students who have left the city, left the state, or are temporarily relocated, right? But still continue to attend class remotely. That's an incredible feat. You know, going back to what I said about the idea of this students and even teachers being resilient. You know, students want to learn. You know, we have students who've taken responsibilities and becoming, you know, income providers for their family. You know, distance education, virtual instructions has made this accommodation possible. There's no other way. This is something that just might open new doors and possibilities, like Carolina talked about. You know, something new that I embrace is all my classes and demos are now recorded. I record my lessons and demonstrations, and these are accessible to students 24/7, anywhere in the world, right? That's pretty mind-blowing. You know, students who have to work can access the lessons online. They can, you know, definitely participate in the class. And, you know, these techniques will definitely transition into the classroom. You know, it's the district I work with, Camino Nuevo, currently uses a lot of platforms. One of them is Parent Square. And it's also an app, but I can communicate with parents and inform them about their child. Do they attend class? Were they late? Did they finish the assignment? Or are their grades slipping? You know, parents love to be informed and they want to be in the loop. So these are just one and some of the tools that will be transitioning once we'll go back to brick and mortar.
Thank you. That's so interesting. And I wonder if maybe some of the other panelists would care to talk about what they feel are some of the greatest challenges facing students right now from their perspective.
I mean, that could be an entire 2-hour, 4-hour panel discussion right there. I mean, it's massive. I mean, frankly, my heart goes out to everybody in education and all the support staff who have made this possible. I'll add that for teaching, let's say, you know, undergrads painting, for instance, which is what I do. There's so many challenges like safety issues at home. Like, how are we going to paint with oil paint? Okay, I guess we're not. Some people can, some people can't. We'll work with acrylic. We don't have ventilation. You know, this is even besides internet. Do you have consistent internet? Can you keep your screen on? You know, like these are issues, you know. How do you have a community in the class when you have like a quarter of the class has to have their screen off because their internet connection is really unstable? And so, you know, you have to think around these problems constantly and be very empathetic. And then how do you help someone instantly at home when they're making a painting and you can't see what they're doing? You know, so there's this, it's really challenging. And I think it requires so much attention to be constantly present when you're teaching. And so that I find the platform of Zoom can be exhausting, but then within the platform of Zoom, I find that I have to be so present and so attentive that it's like a kind of a double whammy of exhaustion. So you know, this dovetails into the personal life questions about how do you keep it all well metered. But yeah, it's complicated, but there's a lot of challenges. I think another thing, and I'll let somebody else speak, is something that's really missed is the in-between conversations that happen in a studio class. You know, when someone just like walks by what you're working on and they just say, wow, you know, or how did you do that? Or the conversation you have in the hallway before or after class. Like those things are really, really major moments and they get missed. And it's hard. You have to figure out ways to recoup that in the virtual classroom.
I think while we're on university teaching, I think one of the things that I've become very acutely aware of is, I mean, really how many challenges were made invisible because of the kind of cultural norms and the students' reluctance to kind of share their life circumstances, of feeling that that doesn't really have a place in the classroom, or that it will somehow seem like an alibi or an excuse. And I think that this has really, you know, in some ways exposed as so many aspects of everything in our culture this year. But I mean, I think it's just really made visible so much that already existed. And then you have on top of all of that, I mean, whether it's the food insecurity, the number of students that we had when the dorms had to be vacated, had nowhere to go because they were either former foster youth or homeless for other reasons, or a variety of life circumstances and challenges. But we have, I mean, I've had so many students who themselves have either fallen sick or become caretakers for younger siblings who have, you know, because they've lost a parent or their caretaker, or like what John, you were talking about, a lot of them have had to take on extra work and have to figure things out. And again, I think, you know, COVID notwithstanding and the exceptionalism of this situation in certain respects, I think that's of course added, but I think a lot of these things were already happening, but the students were very good at hiding them and didn't want that to be part of how they were understood, or kind of the identity that they led with. And I see, and this is maybe a kind of positive valence of this, a kind of willingness to be much more honest and not apologetic about these circumstances, and to actually think about how these structures impact them in all kinds of ways, and actually, instead of hiding from these things, actually take them on and start to think critically about them. But I mean, I think the challenges are just, there's so many. There's so much sickness, so many deaths, that just in my very small sample in this year, it's shockingly high.
So this is a question sort of more about, you know, the systemic role that art education plays, but do you feel that, you know, your role or art education's role in a curriculum or in a, you know, greater system has been marginalized even more than it already was within educational programs? As we all know, you know, the arts are always under extreme duress to prove their own worthiness and to, you know, receive funding. And do you think that, you know, going to online classes and the stretch for, you know, being resource stretched has caused that, you know, to even greater degree?
I think you're right on, and thank you for that question. You know, I view art education as, you know, just education. You know, as an integrated art and AP instructor, I combine the lessons of different subjects. You know, it's a successful art lesson, you know, addresses history, literature, time, space, and place. All of those things come together. You know, art instruction at a higher level becomes a symbiotic relationship, you know, with other subjects. You know, school closures have disproportionately impacted, you know, the lives of, you know, learning communities of Blacks and Hispanics. You know, that's just a reality. You know, as well as students with disabilities, ELL, English language learners. You know, but I've been very blessed that our department budget so much has not been cut or negatively affected. On the contrary, you know, our district was able to purchase art supplies, and we made kits. So students are able to come to campus and pick up these kits by appointment and come and take them home and keep on creating. This is an opportunity that normally, if we were back in the classroom, we wouldn't do because they'd be there. But now they can take this home and do something with it.
I'm gonna piggyback on what John said. I do realize that our district has always limited its funds towards the arts, and it's very unfortunate because we've always had to look for outside resources. And again, like I stated, with this type of a situation, I've been able to draw on these outside resources to come into my class. And even though our Zoom times per class, say that's the Zoom time, I don't have them for very long, but if I can squeeze that art lesson in, or I can manage to mesh it with my science and my math, I push it in there and I bring that through simply because I see that the kids really, really enjoy it. It's part of something that they love to do. And they don't view it as like, oh, it's another math lesson or it's another reading lesson. It's something that they really do enjoy. And a lot of our kids, they are, it's kind of an outlet, that stress release situation that they need it. And I give it to them and I simply just say, hey, you know what? Do it. Just do it. Don't worry about this. Do this. If this is what you're feeling, then let's do this. Simply because like you stated, Susan, a lot of our students, a lot of our children, at least in these communities, in our Latino communities, in our Black communities, they're under some situations that no child that's 10 years old should be dealing with, or no child that's 9 and 8 should be sitting home alone because mom and dad have to be off at work and there's nobody to take care of them. The only person there with them is me. So I'm on there with them knowing that this child is alone. It puts a higher responsibility or a tougher responsibility in the back of my head going, okay, I got to keep this child engaged for a couple of hours and I need to make sure that I check in with mom and say, okay, he was on today and he's doing well and don't worry, I'll make sure before he signs off with me that he's had his lunch or this or that. So, I mean, those situations, it's really opened up for a lot. And unfortunately, unless people are in the education community, understand that situation. And as you guys as you mentioned, it lifts the veil that was there, but nobody really wanted to kind of almost look behind it. And now the students themselves are saying, yes, this is my situation, or, can you excuse me because I got to go, my little sister needs help, or so-and-so needs help. You do it, you do what you got to do, and I'll be here. But yeah, definitely you need it. One of those things, you have to be present so that they are aware that they can count on you, even if it is for those 5-10 minutes or those 20 minutes. And the art itself draws them there because they're like, I don't want to miss this. I want to be here because I know what's going to happen in the next 30 minutes or in the next 20 minutes. So they want to be there and it draws them in. So it's a good, for me, I've used it as a check-in point with them. So it's been a very good tool to make that connection with my students.
Many teachers are describing having to go above and beyond their traditional role as an educator in relation to students' social and emotional needs during the pandemic. And I'm wondering, can you describe how this might be happening for you?
As an educator, I think we're always going, above and beyond. It's just part of the job, right? Throughout the day, I'm juggling different responsibilities. I'm a counselor, mentor, teacher, sometimes a referee. There's a funny quote, and many educators are familiar with, is that, teaching is the only profession you steal things from home and bring to work. Right? And pre-pandemic teaching, I would use a lot of my own money to purchase materials for students. That's because it's a limited resource, right? It's never going to be enough, but you make do with what you can. And sometimes, I come home with tons of receipts not being reimbursed. Normally in a classroom setting, the students are there. I can hear their distress. I can come to them. They can come to me. We're not coming together as we used to, but we're trying from a distance. The role as the educator has been evolving. It will continue to evolve. This is just one iteration of it. I was raised not too far from where I currently teach now, and I can be more thoughtful of students, more thoughtful of the families, and more thoughtful of the needs of the community. What the pandemic has brought to light are the inadequacies that many disenfranchised communities have always faced. I'm hoping positive change will come from this, but to assure this positive change, we have to be politically active, proactive. Elect representatives that have education on top of their priority list.
I completely agree with what John just stated. It's definitely having to reinvest back into our communities. And as a teacher, yes, I've played the role of nurse, doctor, psychologist, a mom, auntie, grandma, something, you name it. And for those of you that have been teachers, you probably have experienced that, where a child or a student has turned around and said, "Oh, hey, mom," and I'm like, they catch it and they're like, "Wait, you're not my mom." And I'm like, "That's okay. I understand. I'm temporarily your mom for right now. So what is it that you need?" So that role as a teacher does take on different titles at different times. And you get to know the students so well that if you've established that. And one of the things I think for any educator is establishing that trust with your students. Because without it, no matter what you teach, it's not going to get through. Because if that trust isn't there, then I wouldn't be able to fathom trying to teach something when the child is just shut down and turns everything away. So that trust is key to everything. And so establishing that is huge. And trying to do that virtually has been very difficult. But I mean, there's ways,
Yeah, so much gets lost through just communicating through Zoom with students, especially, older students, or 20s, graduate students. There's just, you can ask and you can reach out, but there's a lot of ways where, it's just really difficult to tell what's happening. And but I agree with what you're saying exactly about creating authenticity and trust, and that's really, really important. I also found that in the spring, there was a lot of loss that people were processing, both with the pandemic and also just the loss of having a graduation or a kind of closure to education. And these persist, just all these lost ceremonies. There's just so much loss across every category. And it's, you just have to be hyper aware and keep checking in all the time and thinking of all the different ways you can check in. Checking in with everybody as a class, checking in with people individually in meetings, checking in through email. And I've started texting with my students in ways that that was a boundary that I didn't do before, but they text and that's how they want to communicate. So that's what I will do.
As we inch, closer to going back to in-person classes, and I know it's different for college educators and for, elementary, and I wonder if you guys can reflect on that, about your own feelings about going back into the classroom in terms of your own safety, but also in terms of, your comfort level and your own social skills again. Like, how do you guys feel about that?
I feel very comfortable in small groups and experiential learning. A lot of what I do with undergrads is take them away from campus and look at art in person. And, that requires small group format, seminar kind of teaching, and for graduate students as well. Those kinds of things I feel very comfortable returning to right now. I personally feel less comfortable with large classroom teaching. I'm not yet sure what the physical infrastructure is going to be. I haven't been back to campus in, all these months. I mean, there's been so many kinds of conversations about if it will be hybrid, how will that work if we're still masked, how will people be able to read lips, how will there be closed captioning, how will there be all of these, just ways that we can make sure that our work is accessible to students who, for health or other reasons, actually can't come back themselves. So it's a lot to actually think about, and it for me still remains such a hypothetical because we really just don't know, not just what will be in place physically on campus, but what the virus will look like or how it will mutate or not in that time. So I'm very hesitant actually, and I guess that's partly why I've really doubled down on trying to figure out Zoom in the meantime, but also because I do think this is going to be something that we will be using in various capacities for the duration, not just this kind of period, but in the after times more generally. But something that I did just want to put out there, because it's something I've been thinking a lot about that makes me want to return, is that I do think, and I broached this just really briefly earlier, but this question of self-censorship, because there are certain classes that I have taught consistently in the years that I've been teaching that I don't feel comfortable putting online as recordings. And so to give one example, there's a class, and actually Brian, you came as a guest speaker at one point for my Culture Wars class, but it's a general education undergraduate lecture discussion class that deals with art and politics in the United States since Reagan. So we kind of hit the ground running with the culture wars, identity politics, AIDS, thinking really about like the kind of agency of representation, how art has become central to so many ideas of what culture is and who it belongs to, and the institutionalization of positions or the exclusion. You get the idea, but we have, in-class debates, and it's really incendiary material often that we're discussing, and it requires a lot. And it requires, I think, as people said, a certain level of trust, a sense that we are making arguments based on evidence that is historical in nature or that comes from certain kinds of texts that we can point to. And then we have debates around the meaning and interpretation of that information. But it gets really heated sometimes. And I am very honest about my position relative to what we're talking about, but I also make absolutely clear the fact that the grades in no way are contingent upon their politics agreeing with my politics, but I also don't want to shy away from my interpretation, and they can offer me theirs and we can debate that. But that, for example, is a class that I now for the second time have canceled because there's the possibility if I teach it online this fall, I canceled it last fall, I don't want to do that. So I'll teach art since 1940, which has a lot of that material in it anyway, but the framing is not kind of from the outset antagonistic potentially. But so there are many, I guess, ways to fear or wish to return to the classroom. And I think it's complicated both in terms of health and safety concerns, but also questions of free speech and the policing of the academy and the kind of broader culture wars that we're all working within now. I think there's certain material that just registers quite differently, and we have a wide range of students, as we should. But we also have a lot of trolls, and we have a lot of, there are repercussions potentially that are very real about putting material that people might adamantly disagree with, that feels invalidating to them, out there as your personal authorship and as the education, in my case, that they're paying often quite heavily for.
I'm excited to return to class. I mean, I am going to miss spending time with my family, but I'm definitely excited to meet the students in person. I built this 1-year relationship with these students. I know their voices, but I don't know what they look like because, we can't force them to turn on their camera. So all I know are these different avatars So I'm building this abstract relationship. The relationship is real, but the image correlating with that person, it's like, oh, the semiotics behind the reason you chose this avatar, and now I'm going to meet you. So that's a challenge. With every challenge, there's opportunity for growth. I'm a big advocate of lifelong learning. There's going to be a new methodology on how to, that needs to be exploited, and I'm going to give it a shot. But the pandemic has definitely reminded me that, I was in the same disenfranchised cluster that they are currently in, and now I'm in a place of privilege. And I'm grateful for having the career that I have to give back to the community. I'm here to serve. Education is a service sector.
I'm also really looking forward to going back, even theoretically going back. I mean, just to be in a room with a student, even if it's one student with their work in person. I can't wait. I've missed it. And the art is meant to be seen in person and not through a screen. So I can't wait. I mean, obviously I want to be safe and I want everybody to be safe, but I really can't wait. Kind of starving to death.
I love what Rebecca just said, that art's supposed to be seen in person, because that's exactly what my student said to me the other day. He's like, I think I need to see this up close. I said, I think you do too. But right, you're completely right. I can't say that I'm comfortable going back. It's just simply not for I don't have a problem with but I think of my students, and because the only reason being is that I know that my students a lot of them have their grandparents at home, or they have older relatives that live with them. And I've seen what it's done to families, and it's devastated entire families in one way or another. So I'm at odds with it right now, simply because I know that it's an amazing experience to be in the classroom, but at the same time, it's a very high price to pay, or to ask a student's family to pay, to say, okay, yeah, you need to come back, but you're running a risk that if you do, this is what might happen, and it'll be a result of that, you being exposed to this. So I'm torn between the two. I'd rather have my students safe and know that their families are safe, and okay, when it's all great and we can have a green light to be able to reestablish some type of normalcy, you could say. But at the same time, I don't want to have to ask these families who are already dealing with so much loss and so much other just financial issues, emotional issues, to have to ask to put this on top of that. So, I mean, I understand, I get it. They have to have an education, but at the same time, what is more valuable? Or I guess it's really making everybody wonder, like, okay, why are we doing this? Is it because of money, or is it really because of education, or is it really because of what? What weighs, what's heavier? What are we weighing on here?
I'm just 1 second. I just want to, because we had 3 really good questions in the chat box, I just, we had a few more questions, but I think this is a good point to get to them, because I think they're really interesting. One of them is very specific, but I'm going to try to give some time to the other 2. And I think it's important. Lisa Adams says, I teach adjunct at 3 different institutions, and what I found excruciating is the enormous amount of time outside the Zoom sessions that have been demanded. I'm wondering if all of you had to take extensive training in Canvas, for example, or I guess your respective online platforms.
I can say that we were expected to do a lot of stuff online on our own. We were given a choice to what platform to use. So the first time at the end of last year to kind of begin the summer, they said, okay, you're going to be able to choose your platform. But then towards the end of summer, the district turned around and said, well, nope, we're going to use this specific platform. So you got to use this one. So it was a retrain yourself. It wasn't like, here, let me show you how, or let me hand you a how-to-do book. No, it was, okay, figure it out and bumps and bruises as you go. And yeah, it's been an extensive amount of hours. And honestly, planning is tripled because you need to make sure that everything runs correctly, that if you establish a link, the link goes to where you want it to go and it doesn't hit a glitch and then it tells the child or the student, hey, this isn't working or this is blocked. So you not only have to figure out the ins and outs of the platform, you also have to make sure that what you're adding to the platform is accessible and it correlates, or it's allowable on that one platform, or it'll work, or that it'll open, or that it'll function. So it's a lot of planning. And I completely agree with her. It's been an extensive amount of hours. My normal planning hours have tripled. So going to bed at 11:30, midnight, that's normal right now.
No, thank you for that question. It's one that's definitely daunting. I have a neighbor who's also an educator, and he had a great quote where he says, I was like, hey, Chris, how you doing? He's like, I'm super busy, but I'm not as productive. And that's for the same reason Carolina mentioned, that, you know, there's just so much work, there's so much prep, there's so much post work to do. And depending what the platform you use, there is a slight learning curve all the time. But I think at the end, if you can narrow down like maybe 3 basic techniques that you have and implement those platforms, that's what helped me sustain this. You know, being able to have those 3 things, whether it's execution or deliverables, whatever it is, just have those 3 basics and have the platform work for you. But I completely understand, and I'm with you when it comes to the struggle of learning multiple platforms outside of your contractual hours. You're not alone.
I agree with all of that. And just to say, I mean, something that I've observed is that, you know, at the beginning, it was a kind of reactive situation. So we were all doing our best. And I think the students absolutely understood that. And we worked within the technologies that we had. We got what training we could. But the expectations were really very low, for presence and for our work and thinking, of course. But in terms of the technological ways that was facilitated, like they didn't need bells and whistles, they didn't need lots of fancy graphics or interesting dissolves. And I think the longer we're on this, I'm feeling institutionally, but also from the students, a kind of pressure to have higher production values within the kind of teaching formatting, like to keep their attention, to make it interesting, to kind of differentiate even parts of a class, a 3-hour class, which is, you know, what we have for our seminar, that's quite long. And so to structure it and to kind of visually give it breaks and to have it feel different. In a classroom, you can modulate it in so many ways that Zoom flattens. So I have found it's been a kind of, it's not just like we learned systems and then became fully operational or expert in those systems, but that we need to keep acquiring more or better tricks to kind of keep people, interested.
Yeah, and going back to the question too, I just want to underscore how difficult a time this is for adjunct faculty who are balancing different positions with different platforms and different interfaces within those. And, you know, that is really, really hard and time consuming, and switching between this school and that school and all the different email platforms internally. I mean, that is just so much work. That's a huge amount of work normally. And now it's become exponential.
Okay, so this one is a little bit, might be a little bit more involved, but I think it is a good question for maybe Suzanne to answer. And it's from Dina Marok. Hello all, I thank you for this conversation and for your time. I'd be grateful to hear more about how our speakers understand / teach / propose, for purposes of grants or funding, for instance, art as therapy versus social practice engagement versus a set of technical skills.
Well, hi, Dina. I I think Brian is asking me to kind of start with this one because I actually have a research interest in art therapy and actually went back a couple years ago to LMU and took classes in art therapy through their MFT program. But this is a really tough question because I think it's one that each of us will answer quite differently. I think I have been very interested in teaching the history of art as being therapeutically or clinically useful, both for diagnosis and treatment, as a way to also shift focus to non-artist maker populations and to kind of questions of art's uses and philosophies outside of the mainstream art world and its cultural institutions. But that's a very different question from thinking about, how it's getting framed when it's taught not as a kind of history of that phenomenon, but as the making of that thing itself and how it gets contextualized within, whether it's art education, whether it's art as expression, whether it's a studio practice that happens to have these dimensions. So I think I'll happily cede to people who teach studio and teach making, because I'm really looking more at the historical dimensions of these uses.
I guess maybe I can reframe the question a little bit, or maybe like break it down into component parts. So just ask, like, how much do you see your role as an art educator as like a, as a therapy tool, right, versus a technical trade, right? For Rebecca, it might be a little bit different than for John or Carolina, and I think Carolina has pointed this too, how those 20 minutes of art really have to function like a therapy session for the work, whereas like Rebecca, you're teaching sometimes very technical skills. So I think the question is somewhere about navigating that divide. Okay, well, I think, does anyone want to take it on?
Well, I mean, it depends on it. I'm not quite sure how to answer the question exactly. I might not fully understand it. But I do feel that within the context of a class, I kind of have to do all of that at once to make the class work. I have to be teaching skills, I have to be listening to ideas and offering feedback, and also creating kind of interest and motivation. So it's actually, Zoom becomes really demanding because you've got to hold people's interests and work with possibly people who are feeling really difficult, having a hard time motivating, and so you're sort of, sometimes I feel like I'm just wearing a lot of hats at once.
Right.
But I don't think that's really the point of the question, so sorry.
One thing I do, and maybe it's towards addressing the question, but I'm not too sure. It's the idea of art in practice, right? Having a art curriculum that matters, and then defining what is that curriculum that matters. In my case, what I do with the students is I have a social justice and ethnic study pedagogy as the umbrella. So art really just helps, deliver that pedagogy. Technique is important, absolutely, but in the case of the students, it's like, I really want you to think about that idea, and then really start deconstructing the idea, and decenter and find out, well, why are you researching that idea? And I think that kind of dialogue happens more with mature students in high school when it's AP. And I think part of it too, as being an educator and an artist, is being vulnerable. At the end of each lesson, I have an assessment. It's kind of like a self-critique where I have my students, kind of to give me feedback on what worked, what didn't work, what can I do better, and it's all anonymous survey, so there's no fear of some sort of retribution. But yeah, I think it's a balance and a mixture, and sometimes separating them doesn't really work. Sometimes it's a combination.
Okay, there are two questions that are a little bit more specific that I'm hoping we can answer really quickly in the last like 3 or 4 minutes of this discussion. One of it's from Jel Stillwell, says, what types of technology resources specifically related to art education would you recommend for K-12 art classrooms? And I guess this is for John or Carolina, if there are any resources that they're using specifically, or any programs or anything like that that they think are really useful.
So something I'm going to talk about, and I'm sure it's been used a lot, but before we get into technicals, it's got to be the grace and empathy. You know, I say it all the time and will continue to say it, but years from now, when my students are adults, you know, what do I want them to remember? You know, I want them to remember that Mr. Delfonso was here to teach and hear them out. But I also want them to know that I was here to support them, support the instructional needs and emotional needs, even if it's just to listen. But with that said, I think the question is asking more about, you know, the implementation of, you know, student engagement in the classroom. So what helps me is establishing a routine. You know, I have to have a routine. If I give a routine to the students, it establishes some sort of normalcy to the students, right? For example, when a grade, when the assignments are going out, when are the deliverables happening? When am I sending emails? When am I calling home? One of the major tools I use in the classroom is an Elmo. It's the visual projector. I mean, that thing is on all day. You know, using all different modalities for teaching is important, but, you know, nothing compares to the visual, which is something that keeps coming up in the conversation. You know, the visual projector is the most useful tool on top, next to my laptop. You know, a Google number. I had to get a Google number for my phone, you know, communicating with parents and, you know, guardians, you know, being attentive and holding myself accountable for grading once a week. You know, if I got a response from a student, if they haven't shown up in a week, I got to follow up.
I think, well, I know that on my own classroom page, I've created a MOCA page. So the kids know that they can go to MOCA and all of the works that are presented, and I snapshot pictures and I have a collection for them to go through that. And then I know that they have an amazing link that comes out through the New York Times. I've also collected various websites for different museums from not just within the United States, but also all over the world, because now the fact that everyone is offering something virtually. I've created links for the kids to visit the Louvre. I've created links for the kids to go to the museums in New York, and there are so many here in California. So the kids, any time that they need to want to visit a museum, they'll go and sometimes they're like, I didn't do this homework, but I wrote a report on this. And I'm like, hey, you know what? You did that. And they'll create a picture, they'll snap a picture, they'll take a snapshot and they'll include it in the report. So the fact that I've created a list, and it's really easy just to create a list for the kids to click on the link, and the information is there, and it within the actual links, once they open them, it creates another window to other links. And so they kind of go down the rabbit hole, and before you know it, they've discovered things, and then they bring it back to me and they're like, hey, did you know this? And so I didn't know, and I'll add it to the list. So my list has grown extensively, not just from what I've done, but just because the kids have gone off and explored and brought back more. So you'd be surprised if I think her name was Diana or Diana, if you put that out there, you'd probably get some interesting feedback from your own students. And mines are only 9 and 10. So if you're dealing with older students, and you'll be surprised.
All right. So it's been an hour, and I think this is a good place to end the discussion. But before I do, I just want to say a wholehearted and thank you so much to each of the 4 panelists, and to Jean Hoyle, my co-producer, and Brian Dang. I am so thankful for you guys for appearing, and I think this was went above and beyond what I would hope we would discuss. And more than anything else, I just want to thank you guys, not for the work you did today, but the work you're doing every day with your students. And we at MOCA, thank you, because the work that you guys leads to our visitors too. So, you know, we're a symbiotic relationship. So thank you so much on our behalf.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us today. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you everyone to attending.
Of course,
Yes.
of course. All right, everyone, have a good evening. We look forward to seeing you for more virtual MOCA programs. Make sure to check out our website and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.